Picture yourself as a newborn. You can't walk, you can't talk, you can't feed yourself, you can't even manage your own body temperature. You have no clue what predators are. But they absolutely know you're a snack. You weigh about 3 kilograms. Honestly, you're basically a total evolutionary disaster waiting to happen. Yet somehow, you still have ancestors. Thousands of generations of them, meaning that somewhere down the line, a long chain of early humans figured out how to keep a creature as incredibly fragile as a newborn alive. Not just for a week, either, but long enough to raise more kids. Over and over for 300,000 years. So, this question isn't just fascinating, it is deeply personal. If just one of your own ancestors had failed at this task just once, you wouldn't be watching this video right now. You would simply not exist today. That is pretty crazy when you think about it. But here is the wild part. How did those early humans keep kids alive? It isn't just some basic survival guide. It's actually a window into some deeply complex social behaviors to ever evolve on Earth. Secrets that most people rarely think about. Instincts that, in many ways, we've quietly tossed aside today. And now we're paying the price. So let's ask the big question nobody seems to ask. Why is childbirth so brutal in the first place? Most other creatures hit the ground running, or at least walking. A baby giraffe falls nearly 2 meters, lands, and gets right up, trotting around within an hour. A newborn foal is standing in under 2 hours. Even our closest relatives, chimps, can cling tightly to their mothers the second they are born. Human babies, no way. Think about it. A newborn is completely helpless for months, totally and utterly dependent on others for absolutely everything. And this isn't some design glitch. It is actually a brilliant evolutionary trade-off with its own name. Scientists call this secondary ultraciality, which sounds like a made-up word, but means something real. Human infants are born way earlier in their development than almost any other primate. Why? Because of our giant brains. Here it is the catch. Human brains are massive, not just compared to other species, but even to what our bodies should naturally support. A fully formed brain at birth would need a skull so giant that it just could not squeeze through the birth canal. So nature did something pretty clever and slightly terrifying. It made moms give birth early. Human infants are basically born underdeveloped by design. At birth, our brain is only 25% at its adult size. A baby chimpanzee is born at almost 45%. This means a huge chunk of human brain growth, the stuff that takes other species weeks or months, takes us years. And all of that growth must happen outside the womb, totally exposed to the world, while the infant completely depends on other people. This is often called the obstetric dilemma, and it means something huge. A human baby cannot survive alone, even theoretically, even for a few hours. Our species, quite literally, cannot reproduce successfully without deep social support. And this changes everything. It means we must ask, how did early humans keeping babies alive wasn't actually about individual parenting skills. It was about collective teamwork, social support, and how we structured our tribes. What our early ancestors built was, seriously, mind-blowing. You know that old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It is now a bit of a tired cliche. Parents toss it around at baby showers or print it on silly motivational posters. But here is what most people actually miss. In the harsh reality of ancient human survival, this was no metaphor. It was a hard biological strategy, one that proved so incredibly powerful that researchers believe it might be the secret reason Homo sapiens managed to outlast other hominin species on Earth. Scientists call this cooperative breeding. So, how did it work? For almost all other primates, parenting falls entirely on the shoulders of the mother. Sure, the dad might chip in, but the heavy burden falls on just one person. Naturally, this limits how many babies a mother can safely have. She can only handle a few needy offspring at any single time. But humans broke this rule entirely. In hunter-gatherer societies, which made up the vast majority of our evolutionary history, parenting was shared by the entire tribe. Not as a casual favor, not as some polite social gesture, but as a vital gear in how the group survived. Grandmothers played an incredibly crucial role. In fact, there is a famous scientific theory about this, called, you guessed, Ever heard of the grandmother hypothesis? First dreamed up in the 1990s by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes. This idea suggests that human menopause, a total freak of nature in the wild animal kingdom, actually evolved to help older women stop having babies and focus all their energy on keeping their little grandkids alive. Take a moment to think. The idea is that human women survive for decades, past their baby-making years, just because experienced grandmas are just so great at keeping kids safe that nature figured it was smarter to have them stop having babies and start helping raise the entire tribe's kids. And hard scientific data backs this up. Studies. Traditional communities show us that having a maternal grandmother around dramatically boosts toddler survival rates. In some groups, it is actually the best indicator of whether a kid survives past age 2. And it was not just grandmothers, aunts, uncles, older siblings, and even other adults in the tribe. Every single one pitched in with the children in ways we never really see in other primate societies. Babies were passed around, held, carried, fed, and watched by several adults all day long. Researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer tribes, which give us a rare peek into prehistoric human life, report that in tribes like the aka of Central Africa, fathers are within arm's reach of their babies about 47% of the time. 47%. That is far more than most dads stuck in office jobs today. The point is, this ancient parenting setup for ancient kids. Their whole community was unbelievably close. Every child was held by a massive social web, not just leaning on mom and dad. This wasn't just a philosophy. It was survival engineering. Now, let's talk about something that makes modern folks feel a bit uncomfortable. Way back in history, breastfeeding looked completely different from what we think of as normal today. First, the timeline. Among early hunter-gatherers and our closest ape cousins, breastfeeding typically lasted for 2 to 4 years, or sometimes even longer. The World Health Organization actually recommends breastfeeding until age 2 or beyond, which strikes many as shocking. But looking at human evolution, weaning before age 2 was actually incredibly rare and extremely dangerous. Second, the frequency. Ancient moms typically breastfed their babies several times, every single hour, all day. Studies suggest it was up to 4 times each hour in the beginning. This non-stop nursing did a few things. First, it fed the baby. It also soothes the baby's stress levels. More importantly, it works as natural birth control by halting ovulation and spacing out babies by about 3 to 4 years. That gap between kids is huge. Actually, a very common finding in studies on ancient tribes is that children are naturally born around 3 or 4 years apart. That isn't some accident. It's the natural rhythm of. Imagine ancient mothers carrying and nursing just one baby until they grew independent, before having another. Talk about extreme survival. But here is the truly wild part. Wet nursing, which means breastfeeding someone else's hungry infant, seems to be incredibly ancient and widespread throughout history. Modern anthropology actually shows us that in many cultures, multiple women in a tribe would feed babies who were not their own. This did not just keep sick or orphaned infants alive, but it also built tight bonds between different families in ways that offered massive survival benefits. It was, in a very real sense, a collective community lifesaver. But let us be real here. Imagine being a nomadic mother in the Ice Age. You have to gather food, walking several miles every single day over rugged terrain. And you must do this while keeping a totally helpless newborn alive. But how? You cannot set that infant down. Predators are everywhere. Along with other threats, the baby cannot even regulate its body temperature. If it gets cold, it could die incredibly fast. Plus, a crying baby left alone is a magnet for any hungry, meat-eating predator. The solution our ancestors figured out was brilliant. And modern science backs it all the way. Constant physical contact. Keeping infants pressed against the chest, what we call babywearing today, was simply the normal standard for our species. And proof of this comes from several angles. To start, human babies have a remarkably powerful grip reflex. If you touch a newborn's tiny palm, they squeeze immediately with surprising strength. This classic reflex actually a primitive leftover, likely evolved for clinging tightly to a parent. Neurologically, a baby's brain development is literally wired for physical contact. Endless research shows skin-to-skin touch stabilizes a newborn's heartbeat, their breathing, body temperature, and stress hormones. Babies who get carried simply cry less, not because they are spoiled but because closeness meets a deeply rooted biological need. Global parenting studies reveal that in cultures where babies are held all day, crying rates drop dramatically compared to environments where they spend hours alone, like 50% less. According to the data, that crying isn't an attitude problem, it's a built-in alarm system that, from an evolutionary perspective, signals danger. Our prehistoric ancestors were almost always carried for most of the day, and they slept in constant physical touch. They were almost never left alone. Today's parenting advice, though, has spent a whole century pushing the exact opposite. Think cribs, separate rooms, rigid schedules, sleep training. Sure, some of this works, but we have to realize we are, historically speaking, running a massive and totally unregulated experiment on our own species. But eventually, of course, the baby has to transition away from milk, and that's when things get pretty messy and sometimes gross. Then, switch to solid foods. In ancient times was nothing like modern meals. Back then, forget organic purees or squeeze pouches. No perfectly measured baby portions. Instead, they got whatever the tribe managed to forage or hunt and prepared in whatever way they could. So how did parents soften tough meals for prehistoric babies? The trick was pre-mastication. That means adults chewing the food, then passing it over. Sounds pretty gross to us, and yeah, it definitely passes along mouth bacteria to the baby, right? But here is the kicker. Some of those shared microbes actually help. Studies show that these babies get a healthy dose of their parents' good oral bacteria, which actually ends up boosting their immune system. Even our closest wild relatives, chimpanzees, chew food for their babies constantly. This seems to be incredibly ancient, likely as old as humanity itself. Besides pre-chewed food, ancient kids enjoy plenty of soft treats pretty early. Nutritious marrow from cracked bones was healthy and easy to eat, plus eggs, mashed plants, and small bites of fish or meat. Their diet was surprisingly diverse. Fun fact: studying fossilized teeth shows that early hunter-gatherer kids actually enjoy much healthier smiles and fewer cavities than later agricultural societies who relied heavily on starchy crops. Seriously, did ancient hunter-gatherer kids have better teeth than Bronze Age kids? Turns out, eating a wild diet was way healthier than chewing on bread. But here is a secret nobody tells you about. How our ancestors used to sleep. Nobody slept alone. We have touched on this before, but it deserves its own spotlight because it's just so wildly different from today's sleep expectations. In almost every hunter-gatherer tribe, and across almost every single traditional culture on Earth, tiny babies and toddlers sleep in constant physical contact with a parent. No sleeping in some separate room or empty crib, but right against a warm, safe body all night. This ancient habit of co-sleeping or bed sharing is not some trendy modern parenting style. It is our default human setting for 99% of our evolutionary history. Sure, the warnings against it in modern Western medicine come from some very real and valid concerns, especially the risks of accidental suffocation in soft, fluffy beds with unresponsive caregivers, and those are totally valid worries in our modern world. But back in ancient days, sleeping on hard ground with sober and alert parents in cool, breezy environments, those same risks do not apply in the same way. Plus, the actual benefits of co-sleeping for a baby's development are well proven. Steadier body temperatures, much more regular breathing patterns, and frequent late-night feedings, plus significantly longer periods of breastfeeding overall. There is even a fascinating theory connecting co-sleeping directly to SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. A few clever researchers, including anthropologist James McKenna, who spent devoted decades to infant sleep, believes that those constant, soft nudges from a sleeping parent breathing and shifting actually steady the little one's breathing throughout a delicate growth phase, when their body is still shaky. Now, whether this is fully proven yet, the main point stands. Our infants evolved to expect close physical touch at night. An isolated nursery is really a recent invention. Historically, infant survival rates throughout ancient human history make you wonder if sleeping close together was what actually kept them alive. But let's be real, for most of human history, child mortality was staggeringly high by modern standards. Scientists estimate that back in ancient Paleolithic and early Neolithic times, communities, anywhere from 30 to 50% of kids passed before turning 5. This was not because ancient parents did not care. They were just living without germ theory, or any antibiotics, life-saving vaccines, or basic nutritional knowledge, simply without the tools that have slashed childhood mortality by 96% since 1800. Yet, they survived, and some of their ancient practices actually worked. Using healing plants is incredibly ancient. Even wild chimps self-medicate with specific plants. Plus, the archaeological record shows we used herbal remedies at least 50,000 years ago. Many ancient cultures slowly built complex herbal pharmacies, vast libraries of plant-based cures that we're still digging through today for medical breakthroughs. Willow bark, the original aspirin, has been fighting pain and fevers for thousands of years now. Honey worked as a germ-killing wound healer back in ancient Egypt. And probably long before that, garlic actually has germ-killing powers our ancestors somehow had figured out way before they ever possessed the science to explain why. Still, none of this saved babies from lethal brain infections or severe dehydration. But it was a beginning. And what existed absolutely everywhere, constantly, was ritual. Every single culture on Earth has built deep rituals around birth and raising children. Naming ceremonies, magic charms, prayers, and rites of passage. To us today, these might seem like silly old superstitions, but researchers argue they served real social goals. They brought the whole village together around the baby. They forced a shared responsibility for the child's safety. They offered healthy ways of handling deep grief when children die. And make no mistake, that pain was incredibly real. Ancient baby burials in historic gravesites are often lovingly arranged, sometimes with favorite toes, sometimes even flowers. This myth that ancient parents were cold to losing their infants, that life was cheap and grief easily brushed off, is completely disproven by the actual evidence at every turn. They cry, they fought, and slowly, over thousands of years, they built up real-world knowledge, just to slowly tip the odds. But here is the wild part. Nobody ever predicts. So much of what ancient parents did to keep babies safe actually worked better than the stuff we do today. Not everything, obviously, absolutely not. Vaccines, clean water, and modern medicine are completely beyond debate. To drop in child mortality during the 20th century is easily one of our greatest triumphs in human history. Period. Nobody with any sense wants to go back to 40% child mortality rates, but in the day-to-day world of hands-on parenting, the social, emotional, and physical everyday setup of early childhood, there is a pretty strong argument that modern life has completely dismantled systems that did vital work, all without us even realizing what we were breaking. Like the extended family, a massive network sharing the load across several adults. Today, in most Western countries, families are locked in nuclear units, often scattered all over the place, sometimes totally isolated, and constant physical closeness throughout the day has been replaced by plastic swings, bouncers, and playpens, gadgets designed just to keep the infant calm without human touch. That natural, shared sleeping space was replaced by a solitary nursery and a bizarre cultural fear of clinginess that, from an evolutionary perspective, is, honestly, pretty weird. Look, nobody is to blame. It is simply the byproduct of economic and societal shifts, rapid urbanization, the dual income setup, and the loss of extended family support. These changes happened for reasons that had zero to do with raising children, and parents trying to navigate all this are doing their absolute best. Yet the rates of postpartum depression, baby sleep struggles, and parental burnout in modern societies are real, documented, and shockingly high. And if you look at the social setup modern parents are navigating, then compare it to the social world we actually evolved for, the gap is absolutely massive. The ancient answer to, how do you keep a baby alive, was, you don't do it alone. You do not even do it as a couple. You do it as a village. You share the load. You distribute the exhaustion. You make absolutely sure that no single parent is the only point of failure for a kid's survival. That is not some philosophy. It is pure engineering. So, how did our ancestors keep kids alive? They held them constantly. They breastfed them for years. They slept right beside them every night. They chewed up food for them. They wrapped them in a network of supportive adults, grandmas, aunts, uncles, neighbors, and close friends, who all felt a deep responsibility for that baby's safety. They mourned deeply when children die, which happened constantly. They struggled to understand sickness with very limited tools at their disposal. They created deep rituals to hold shattered communities together in the face of grief. They slowly gathered knowledge down through generations, passing it on as custom, daily habits, and finally, much later, written words. And the common thread running through all of it, the single most consistent truth, across every unique culture and era, every single environment, is that children only survived when they were evolutionarily wired to stick together. And we completely crumble and left alone. Why isn't that just ancient history? Because it is still true today. Sure, we have built incredible modern technology to keep our kids safe. Plus, we conquered those ancient biological threats that used to claim half of all children before they were even walking. That is genuinely, deeply wonderful. But what about the social technology we used to have? That messy, beautiful web of real, human connection that our species spent hundreds of thousands of years building. We are still struggling to figure out just how to keep it alive today. Ancestors had zero modern antibiotics. They had no ultrasounds, and no fancy baby formula, pediatricians, or even car seats, but they had each other. And honestly, it turns out, for everything that really actually matters, that was enough.